Okay. Kate, thank you very much, Craig, for joining us this evening. Like I mentioned just a little bit before we started, we're going to have this more of an interactive session. It's all about communication. So it's the building blocks of communication. So keep your mic off and okay, why is it not there? It is. In the dictionary, of course, communication has a definition, a process by which information is shared between individuals through a common system or symbol, sign, or behavior. As we all know, there's different forms of communication. What is the most important thing in communication to make it an effective communication? Craig, you can unmute, and between the three of us, what would you say is the one thing that you have to have communication effective?
Good listening skills.
Ken and I both said that this afternoon.
To be understood, I think, is the most important part of communication. And I think that's something that Margaret and I spoke about a little earlier. But yes, yeah, to listening skills are absolutely critical.
Ken, I'll give you this one.
Sure, absolutely. I think this is a great slide because it really speaks to the whole concept of communication, where you've got someone who's a sender. He encodes or she encodes a message, basically whatever mechanism that they're using to provide a message, be it verbal, nonverbal, be it in writing, be it symbols, whatever it happens to be. That message is then in a channel, which then the receiver receives. I mean, it's a very high level diagram, but it really comes down to that. We all have all kinds of communication mechanisms. I'm waving my hands, that gets someone's attention. I'm staring at somebody, right? There's all kinds of different ways to get a message across. I think it's really important for all of us to understand that when the receiver gets the message, be it verbal, nonverbal, be it any kind of different mechanism like Margaret had in the definition at the beginning of the presentation, that it gets decoded. And then that person who's received the message is providing feedback in some way, either by nodding their head, folding their arms, using constructive language, raising an eyebrow, whatever it happens to be in that channel, whatever that channel might be, goes back to the sender. I know this is a very high level diagram, but it really does come back to what we've said at the beginning of the call already, is that you're listening, you're interpreting, you're actually trying to understand. So the listening part also includes the eye contact. It also comes back to looking and observing, as well as what is being said or what's not being said. I think that's the one thing we as Toastmasters, especially experienced Toastmasters, Margaret, you and I chatted about that a little earlier, is that our experienced Toastmasters in the coaching role are experienced Toastmasters. These are people who have been in Toastmasters for a while. They've learned a lot in the Toastmasters Club and also through normal jobs, whatever it happens to be. You have that expertise already, and that's what you should be drawing on in your communication when it comes to club coaching, is that ability, and to not forget the different channels and the different types of messages that you would give and also receive from a club and from the executives and from the membership of that club.
Now, there is several different forms of communication. Craig, I'd like you to pick one of these and tell us what you think about it. Pick one that you normally use, or one that you want to tell us some information about. You're muted.
I'm just reading it at the same time, so.
Yeah.
Okay,
you can stay on unmuted if you want.
The more than based on purpose in the informal communication. That's where you're either just chatting before a meeting starts, short for dinner with your friend or something, and you're just shooting the breeze, talking about whatever you think is necessary or important at the time.
Sort of like you and I were doing before the
Right.
meeting started.
Yeah, yeah.
So the formal part of that would be your get right down to the nitty gritty, and you just follow an agenda and you discuss
Yeah.
it would be the
Yeah.
formal.
Yeah.
Ken, which one would you like to pick?
I would think, oh, geez. I think written communication is very interesting in terms of the message that you're trying to send, especially in normal jobs and even in emails that you would receive from somebody. So you get a lot of conversations with different generations and the manner of how they're writing their communications. So I see quite interesting a lot of articles that talk about the informality of a written communication now in business and also in the personal lives. A lot of emojis. I mean, that's something I think is really fascinating to watch. Is I'm in my 60s, Margaret. You're in your 70s. I have to tease you about that. We are a different generation, but we're both very adept at texting. And it's quite shocking because people are quite surprised that people of our generation text, right? So written communication varies. And I find that really fascinating that there's that formality, the written communication being a text or an email, and you don't see very many letters anymore. So there's a transition in our lives about how written communication is put together. So I find it really interesting, but it is a mechanism, and it also can be misinterpreted. That's a really important part too, is understanding your written communication. What message are you trying to send? And is it informal and informal written communication, or is it very formal? So that's where the lawyers kick in, and then you start to argue about one word, right? So I always find that really fascinating, that part of communication.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Written communication is something else, and like my grandchildren, the way they communicate is not the way I communicated when I was a kid or even a few years ago. They have all these words. Craig, you may have a little more knowledge in that. You're not that much younger than the two of us, but you're a little bit younger than the two of us. How about you? Do you find the younger generation have a different language they speak sometimes?
The different language, and I'm in the same boat as you are. Texting has become an evil necessity the last 3 or 4 years. Even with the club I'm coaching, the president, everything is by your phone. So you have to back and forth that way.
Interesting. So that's the way that you interact with that club president, is texting or
That's the way. That's the way she wanted it.
interesting. That actually is quite I think for us as coaches and experienced Toastmasters, as we have to adapt to the scenario, right? That goes back to their previous slide, which is the mechanism for communication and the channel that's being used. And I think the challenge we face is the misinterpretation sometimes. So that's the clarity part.
Yeah.
Am I actually receiving the message that you're texting to me? Is it mistyped? I mean, that's my favorite. I think all of us have seen the funny texts on the internet where somebody's mistyped a word, and that becomes problematic, right? That's interesting. That's how they want to communicate with you, is by a text.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're all guilty of doing it. I've done it. You've done it. Margaret's done it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm famous for doing it. I don't know.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely famous, Margaret. Some of the texts that I've got from you have just been hilarious. But then the nature of the talk tonight is to have people understand that you need to be self-aware, that all of these different communication styles and channels and purpose are there. But again, I'll go back to, we're experienced Toastmasters. We have to be able to understand and not and clarify. Clarity is really important. Did you really mean to say what you said? Am I misunderstanding what you're trying to get across in your point? And back to what you said, Craig, earlier, the listening skills, the interpretation skills are the most important thing we get in Toastmasters.
Yeah. Like you can go to a meeting and you can have somebody that's talking and talking and talking. You might not get much out of because they talk so much, eh? But you may have that person sitting in the corner that says only 3 words, and you get more out of that 3 words than the other, or somebody that you just see their body language or something like that.
Absolutely. Good point, Margaret. That's a very good point. This one, can I take take this one
You
because
can take this
I
one
really
on.
like this one. We were chatting about this earlier. The 7 C's of communication. I love this slide simply because we've just kind of chatted about that a little bit. The 7 C's, 7 C's, clarity. Are you being specific in the message that you are trying to put across, be it personal or business? And I shared with Margaret a little earlier that that's one of the biggest challenges is, are you clear in your message? Correctness. Sometimes you need to be aware of the scenario you're in and whether or not your communication is correct in that scenario. Because sometimes you might either use the inappropriate language, it could be a cultural thing. You have to be aware of that. So you have to read the room. I always call it reading the room. Are you going to be correct? Is it correct the way you're putting the message across? Completeness. Sometimes people omit things or they forget. So again, I'm back to saying that we as experienced Toastmasters need to understand that. Is the message complete? Is there something that hasn't been shared or has been forgotten? That's really important that that's part of the conversation. And we, as coaches, have to be able to say, am I missing something? Do I need to clarify what is being asked? Is there something that's missing here? Am I clear? And is it the clarity there? And is it complete the message that's being provided in terms of the communication? Concreteness is another one I felt it was really interesting to see, because is it concrete, meaning that it is, wouldn't say cast in stone as much as this is what the message is supposed to be. Conciseness, another one. You just mentioned that, Margaret, where you're in a meeting and somebody talks for 20 minutes and mentally you're going, I never heard or understood one bloody thing that person just said. What were they trying to tell us, right? Politicians. Could you keep it? Could you shorten it down? That would be really nice if you would do that. Coherence. Again, understanding. Is it coherent? Are you putting a message across that is in word salad? I'm sorry, Kamala Harris. That woman drove me nuts to watch any of the political debates in the States, because I couldn't hear what she was saying. I couldn't understand what she was saying. It's like you're just talking, but there's nothing there, right? So again, I don't want to get politics involved, but I use that as an example. Coherence. What were you trying to say? Is it coherent? Was it making sense? And then courtesy. I think courtesy is another one which goes back to correctness. Courtesy being, are you aware of your message to the audience of people you're speaking to? Personal experience, I've worked with many cultures in the United States many years ago. I had a team of 10 people from 10 different countries. I had to be aware of that in my courtesy, how I was speaking to someone, because different cultures have different means of communication. So you need to be very aware of that. And I think that's a very important one as well, is to make sure that your courtesy is there, that you're making sure that your communication style or to who you're speaking to is being courteous. You're not being rude, or you don't realize you're being rude. And if they say to you, well, I really don't like the way you're speaking to me, then you can take that and say, okay, well, then I'll adapt my communication in some way, shape, or form. So again, Margaret, thank you for letting me share this one, because I really like this one. This is a
You're
great,
welcome. You're
great
welcome.
slide.
Craig, what would you like to say about the 7 C's? I'm sure you've had some incidents of some things that you could bring up about 7 C's in communication.
Now, this is where I've got problems with time, is reading the person. Where you think you're saying the right or doing it the right way, and it's back to one or two little words you accidentally screwed up on.
I think a lot of times people think that they're clear or they're courteous or, they're correct because of the way they think. They don't,
Yeah.
as Ken said earlier, they don't read the room and, hey, that wasn't correct. And I wasn't really clear because the room is not set up that way. Hey?
Yeah.
Now, what communication style do you use the most and why? Craig, we'll have you answer this one. Each person will answer this one so that we can see the difference between the three of us.
And you're going back to the 7 Cs from before this?
Whatever answer, you don't have to use any of the
Okay,
slides. It's just what
okay.
communication do you normally use? Like,
It's a combination of sending an email, or it depends who it is. Sending an email, try to keep it short as you can, or just pick up the phone and chatting. I've got some people, I've got clients at work, some of them, I know that they're, again, it's just more, this be, some of them be more age related. So I've got clients at work, some of them there's 70s, 80s. They're scared of using the computer and the internet, and they're low, and so it's a lot easier just picking up the phone and shooting the breeze for 20 minutes, see how they're doing, and let them talk what they want to. But with some other things, if it's the same message you got to 5 or 6 people, it's quite short. A short email, what do you think of A, B, C, D, and E, and leave it at that.
mhm,
Depends on the situation.
mhm. Ken, what do you think?
I would echo what Craig is saying. My role, I'm an architect, and I've had various roles in my career, and I've had large teams, I've managed large teams in my occupation. I'm now an advisor, so I advise. So my style is slightly different now than it used to be because I don't have anybody working for me directly. So now I advise. So my style has changed a bit. But what you say, Craig, I do have to adapt my style depending on who I'm speaking to. So if I'm in a steering committee, that's a different audience, and my language is totally different. It's more clear and concise, and it's I wouldn't say abrupt as much as very formal. And then if I'm talking to someone who I'm a peer with or someone who I work with all the time, I'll pick up, and I have teams at work, so I just teams phone them, and we'll have a chit chat like you just said. And I adapt my style. The written portion is the formality where I'm providing an update or clarity on a specific issue. It will be in writing, and I'll make sure I figure out who my audience is. And then others who, again, who I'm very familiar with, we swear, we tell stories, we kibitz. I might have a very short email or a very short instant message to someone, but I think it's really important because we're recording this for our coaches is understand the audience, understand the club you're working with. Like you said, the president you're interacting with would prefer to text. There might be clubs where they don't want that. They want it in writing, or they want you to phone them all the time, or they want you to come in person. I think the adaptation is really important. Again, I will stress that because we are Toastmasters, we've all learned that, right? We are experienced Toastmasters. To be a coach, there are certain criteria. So you would and should be using different communication styles. I think that's really important.
I have to agree with all three of you. You have to. I find I have to change my style depending who I'm talking to, or also when you start talking to somebody or you're emailing them, just by the response, you can tell whether you have to sometimes change it. And I have some people that I can send an email to, but I better pick up this thing and text them and say, I sent you an email. Because otherwise, it might not get opened. You know, I have
Very true,
friends that
Margaret.
they click it off without even reading it. You know.
You're not mentioning any names, Margaret, are you? You're not going to mention any names?
No, I'm not going to.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And then there's the odd time that you can send something and it has the wrong date on it.
So so that's a good example. So let's share that one. That's a very good one to share. So we were communicating this week. Margaret invited me to a meeting, and it was for tomorrow at noon. So when I looked at the invite, I went, that doesn't look right, because she wants to talk about the meeting on Thursday evening, and she's inviting me to a meeting on Friday at noon. I might not be at that meeting. I need to clarify that with her. So I contacted Margaret, and I asked Margaret, this invite for Friday at noon, is that for that Thursday evening meeting that you're having? And she said, well, yeah. And I said, well, won't that meeting be over? I mean, I won't even be at the meeting. I just don't know what you're doing. So anyway, that's a great example of, I received the message, but then I came back and said, I'm confused. This doesn't look right. Had to do it, Margaret, sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I mean, it was my fault. I picked the wrong day. And of course, when he asked, yeah, of course, it's for Thursday. You know, we got to go over this on Thursday noon to get ready for a night. Yep. And the thing that he didn't tell you was after 5 o'clock or so, he never checks his phone. So I could have phoned all I wanted. It would have never been answered or checked.
I'd be in my living room having coffee, watching television with the wife.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. What style of communication might you use after today, or will it stay the same as you are now? And also in that, so we don't have a third question, do you consider yourself a good communicator? And give an example. And Ken, we'll let you start this one.
You know, when I started at Toastmasters 30 plus years ago, I was an absolutely horrible communicator. I have a degree in computer science, so you can imagine what that means, sitting in a room coding. I would say I'm a pretty good communicator now. My son would have disagreed with me a few years ago. He said, Dad, I'm not one of your project people. So communication styles need to be adapted to the audience and the people you're speaking with. I think being a little older now and, you know, been through the wars and everything else, I think I'm actually a pretty good communicator. There are days where I'm a horrible communicator because it's just human nature. Again, as I mentioned a little earlier, I've adapted my style because of the role I play in the organization I work for. But in the personal life, I'm part of some different societies, so I have to adapt my style as well, depending on who I'm speaking to. So I would think, you know, Toastmasters has definitely helped with that and that practice. That's the other thing. That's the whole point of being a coach. You're trying to help a club come back and to improve their club, you know, their club success and what it is they'd like to achieve. So I think, yeah, I'm pretty good. I wouldn't say I'm great. I'd say I'm good because I practice. And I think that with Toastmasters, if you don't continually come, you'll lose that skill, the ability to practice those skills. And Margaret, you and I have known each other for a few years now, and you're leaps and bounds. But again, it's because you're involved with so many things. And Craig, I don't know you that well, but this is the thing I think this presentation is trying to get across to folks. Your biggest strength is the ability to listen and to adapt your communication style to achieve the outcomes that you're trying to achieve for the club you're working with. You have to be aware of that. Self-awareness is probably one of the best things that I've got from being a Toastmasters and the practicing. And also you're a little harder on yourself as well, because you're like, did I make sure I got my point across? And I think a little bit of humility is probably good for a lot of us, but that's the thing I think that great communication gives you is the humility. Am I getting my point across? So
Yeah.
long rant, but that's what I got.
Tell Craig what your new thing is that you just did just a little while ago and found out you really liked it.
Oh, yes. So I was invited to do a 4-H judging contest. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. I'm looking forward. They've asked me to help with their provincial judging. So I'm absolutely really excited about that because the kids were awesome. It was so good to work with the kids. I was so impressed. They had little guys like 5 and 6 years old, and the oldest, I think, was 19. It was absolutely wonderful. I was so impressed with these young people. I just went, wow, this is just so cool, right? They're standing up in front of an audience of people and talking about their cows, their trips, how, you know, the calving operation, the history of their farms. I thought it was just fantastic. It was just great. I'm really looking forward to doing the provincial one now. They were so nice. They're just such nice people.
Our club did that for a group last year.
Oh, okay.
It's not it's the female. It's not was it like teenage girls like 9 to 14.
Isn't it
So
awesome?
it
Like it's
is.
just it's so cool. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. Like what what I thought about that was, I mean, I'm sure all of us went to high school. I did Model UN one time. That was it. We didn't have anything else in our school to do those kind of things. And I'm like, boy, that would be something if you made kids do more of that in school, right? The ability to communicate is the biggest thing all of us need, no matter what kind of job you have. You can't talk to people and listen to people. You're in trouble. Like you've got to be able to do that.
Yeah. Craig, what would you like to say to answer those questions?
I'm probably in the same boat as the three of us are in the same boat. I wouldn't say we're better communicators than we were. We still have a lot to learn. And you have to remember that because none of us are perfect, so we'll screw something up somewhere. So as I said, in terms of which style, I'm adapting more to getting used to the texting and all of that
Hmm.
because I'm not, to me, my phone's my phone. I just want to use the phone.
Mhm.
So having to text some person to me can be irritating at times.
I'd agree.
Hmm.
It's a phone, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk to you. They just want to text with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When did that start? When did that become a thing? You're right, Craig. I agree with you. It's like you don't phone anymore. You just text people. Like it's silly. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And you use these short forms, like just the you means you,
Yep.
like,
See?
well, I have to agree with you both. And my big thing, and I'm sure Ken will tell you, and Craig, if he gets to know me more, he will know too. Technology and me, up till about 10 years ago, I didn't know how to email at all. So me and technology are sort of meant to be not together. But I'm slowly learning. I'm slowly picking up some things. I still have issues with it. And as far as a communicator, I think the more that I communicate, the better I get. And I always remember that there is no way that I will ever remember everything or ever take and know how to do everything. And that there is many, many different ways to skin that cat, as they say. So I just keep learning, and I enjoy somebody evaluating me, saying, hey, this, that. And I've learned not to take it personally a few times, depending who it is. I have taken things personally, but I've learned more and more not to do that. So, now there's
Mhm.
only one rule for being a good talker, leader, and listener. I
Completely
think
agree.
that we have to learn to use our ears way more and close our mouth lots of times and just listen. And we will learn a lot more. Communication is a mixture of words and a mixture of way you use your hands, your body, whatever. It's just a whole mixture of everything. There's so many forms of communication, and I think we always have something new to learn in communication. Ken, what would you like to add to that? And Craig, what would you like to add to that?
I hope that this presentation, if people watch this, they understand that the intent of this presentation tonight was just to reinforce the skills that you should already have as a Toastmaster and not to lose sight of the fact that there are different ways of communicating and that is something that as you gain experience, and again, we're all experienced Toastmasters, don't lose sight of the fact that there are many different ways to communicate and to be aware of those things. Reading the room is probably the most important skill that I think I've got from going to Toastmasters, and that's helped my career tremendously. But also as a coach, you need to keep that in mind that there are different ways to communicate and that you need to be aware of all of those and use those skills. Learn and use the skills you've got from Toastmasters to help the club that you're trying to coach. Don't just think of one way. There's other ways to communicate. So that'd be my 2 cents tonight, is just that message to the people watching this, is that keep that in mind. Use the skills that you've garnered from being a Toastmaster.
Craig, what would you like to put across about communication?
Just echo what Ken was saying. Reading the room and you back to you got 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. Use use it properly.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and because I have worked in different areas, I don't know if you know, Craig, but I used to work in the jail a lot. Now, communication in the jail and communication on Toastmasters, there's quite a bit of difference, believe it or not. So you had to learn to change, and you had to know when to close your mouth and open your ears and really widely open your eyes as to what was going on. So, you know, and I also was a counselor in the past, a community counselor. So when it comes to politics, you have to take and be able to talk a different language sometimes. And that's just some of the changes that you have to learn in communication. So I would very much like to thank you, Craig, for taking the time tonight to come. It shows to both Ken and I think Ken will probably have a couple words after this, that you are very interested in being a coach and wanting to help your clubs just by the way you make sure that you take the time to show up at training when it's offered to you, rather than say, oh, there's never any training. You know, we never have this, we never have that. You have shown up at the training and it's very, very appreciated by us. Ken, what would you like to?
I just echo that. I think the one thing that, again, as a coach, is to, and as we've said, I'll stress this again, reading the room also in terms of being a coach is assessing the viability and the reality of the club that you've been assigned to help and evaluate, because it is a two-way street, right? You're not telling them what to do, you're advising and coaching them to what they need to do. So the communication skills are so important, and the ability to be very political, or I would say correct, but also to understand what it is they're looking for, and also to give that back to them and observe and be able to say, based on my experience, I think we should consider having this approach to what we're going to do here. And quite frankly, there are going to be clubs, and Margaret and I have talked about this, that you need to be, maybe you need to change your style and be a little more direct or a little softer. It really just this depends. And Margaret being the director of this area, I mean, that's the person to reach out to. And Margaret and I have already had conversations about clubs in the past. So that's what you need to do, is bounce that information off Margaret, where here's my game plan for the club to help that club move forward. What do you think? Does this make sense to you? And also, again, make sure we do all the necessary paperwork, that everybody is very much aware that you're not there to magically fix everything. You're there to help guide them. But it is on the club to help move forward as a coach to be successful. Again, that's kind of where I go with this, Margaret.
Yeah. Craig, do you have anything before we adjourn this?
No, I'm good right now, thanks.
Okay. Well, I will take and end this evening, and thank you both very much for coming. And we will not have one next month.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Stop recording then?
Yeah, I gotta find it. Stop recording.